At 5:17 a.m. on February 23, 1943, Chief Engineer Harold Foster stood in the frozen mud beneath the starboard wing of a B-17 Flying Fortress at RAF Ridgewell, England, watching Captain Michael Torres climb into an aircraft that probably wouldn't make it home. Torres was 24 years old, 7 combat missions, twice shot to hell and back. The Luftwaffe had scrambled 22 Focke-Wulf FW-190s to intercept the morning bombing run over Bremen. Torres would be flying straight into them with a patched fuel line, 3 repaired hydraulic leaks, and a prayer. Foster had been keeping B-17s airworthy for 11 months. He knew these bombers inside and out. 4-engine heavy bomber, 13 machine guns, legendary for absorbing punishment and bringing crews home. The Army called it the Flying Fortress. The crews called it the only thing between them and a German grave. But the B-17 had one fatal problem that was killing American airmen every single day. It couldn't stay in the air when parts ran out. The official repair protocol required replacement parts shipped from the States. Shredded aluminum skin. Wait for factory panels. Torn control surfaces. Wait for approved patches. Bullet-riddled fuel lines. Wait for certified replacements. Average wait time, 18 to 26 days. Torres and his crew didn't have 26 days. Nobody did. Command doctrine was crystal clear. Damaged aircraft beyond field-level repair would be grounded until proper parts arrived. Do not improvise structural repairs. Do not use unauthorized materials. Do not compromise aircraft integrity with temporary fixes. Follow the manual. Wait for the parts. Keep the birds regulation perfect. Foster had tried following that doctrine for 6 months. It hadn't worked. The Germans weren't waiting. They hit the airfields every 3 days, shredding bombers faster than the supply chain could feed them. Every mission brought back aircraft with wings torn open, fuselages ventilated, hydraulic lines split, fuel tanks punctured. The mechanics did what they could with approved materials, but approved materials took weeks to arrive. The 381st Bombardment Group had lost 43 B-17s in the past 8 weeks. 11 were shot down in combat. 32 were grounded waiting for parts that never came fast enough. Those grounded bombers meant 320 fewer gunners in the air, 32 fewer bomb loads on target. And every mission the remaining crews flew got deadlier because they were flying undermanned. Foster had watched too many crews die because their bomber was parked on the tarmac with a fixable hole and an unfillable requisition form. Good men. Kids, really. They'd lean against their grounded fortress, smoking cigarettes, watching their squadron take off without them. Then 2 days later, they'd get reassigned to a different bird as replacements for a crew that didn't come back. The engineering manual said the problem was supply chain logistics. The quartermasters said the field mechanics needed to be patient. Proper parts are en route. But Foster knew better. The problem wasn't the supply chain. It was the regulation itself. The B-17's aluminum skin was 0.064 inches thick on the fuselage, thinner on control surfaces. A 20mm shell punched a hole roughly 4 inches across. Smaller caliber rounds left holes between 1/2 inch and 2 inches. Those holes didn't compromise structural integrity. The internal frame still held. But they did 3 things that grounded aircraft. They created drag that killed fuel efficiency. They let freezing air into the fuselage at 25,000 feet. And they could tear wider under stress if left unsealed. The approved fix was riveting a replacement aluminum patch. But replacement patches required specific alloys, precise dimensions, and depot-level tools. Field crews didn't have them. What they needed wasn't perfection. They needed a seal, something that could cover a hole, hold under stress, survive altitude, and last long enough to get the bomber through one more mission. Foster had mentioned this to the group engineering officer 5 weeks ago. The officer said field modifications to airframes violated Army Air Force regulations. Using non-certified materials on flight-critical surfaces could cause catastrophic failure. Changing anything required technical approval from Boeing, and Boeing was 4,600 miles away in Seattle. Besides, unauthorized repairs voided the aircraft warranty. So Foster did something that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Stunts Manual. He went to Supply Tent 7, pulled a wooden crate marked Adhesive Tape, Pressure Sensitive, OD, Army Duct, tore it open, and grabbed a 2-inch wide roll of cloth-backed, polyethylene-coated tape the Ordnance Department had designed for sealing ammunition cases in humid jungle environments. The tape was waterproof, held at extreme temperatures, and bonded to metal. It wasn't aircraft certified. It wasn't in any repair manual, it was duct tape, and nobody had ever used it to fix a warplane. The modification took 23 minutes. Foster cleaned the aluminum around a 3-inch bullet hole in Torres's starboard wing with solvent, dried it, stretched strips of tape across the hole in overlapping layers, then burnished the edges down with a roller to eliminate air pockets. He repeated the process on 2 more holes in the fuselage and a split seam near the tailgun position. When he was done, Captain Torres's B-17 looked like it had been bandaged by a field medic. Nobody said anything. The pre-flight inspection crew didn't check for unauthorized materials that morning. They were focused on engines, control surfaces, and ammunition loads. Foster told no one. He watched Torres taxi to the runway. Watched the Fortress lift into the frozen February sky. Watched it disappear into the darkness toward Germany, and the flak fields, and the FW-190s waiting over Bremen. What happened in the next 6 hours would change how every B-17 in the 8th Air Force flew for the rest of the war. The sound hit you first, not the engines. Those you heard from miles away, a deep thrumming that vibrated in your chest. No, the sound that hit you was the wrong sound. The cough and sputter of dying cylinders, the whistle of wind through torn aluminum, the hydraulic scream of landing gear that shouldn't be grinding like that. At RAF Ridgewell, winter 1943, Chief Engineer Harold "Hank" Foster stood at the edge of the runway and watched the 381st Bombardment Group limp home from Bremen. Maiden America came in first. Trailing black smoke from her No. 3 engine, the cowling half torn away and flapping like a broken bird wing. She touched down hard, bounced, settled, and the moment her wheels hit tarmac, Foster saw it. The entire starboard side of her fuselage looked like someone had taken a shotgun to a tin can. Ragged holes punched through the aluminum skin, some small as a fist, others wide enough to shove your head through. Devil's Daughter followed. Her left wing had a section of fabric torn completely off the aileron. You could see straight through to the control cables. She came in crooked, compensating for the drag, and when she taxied past, Foster counted 23 separate punctures in her nose cone alone. Then Knockout Dropper, then Birmingham Brawler, then Sweet Phyllis, barely holding altitude, one engine completely dead, another coughing oil smoke, and her ball turret gunner slumped inside the Perspex bubble, red streaks frozen against the glass. 6 bombers had left before dawn. 6 came back. That was a good day. Foster walked the flight line as the crews climbed out. They moved like old men, stiff, slow, eyes fixed on nothing. Captain DeMarco stepped onto the wing of Maiden America, looked back at the shredded fuselage, and just shook his head. His co-pilot, a kid named Patterson, sat down right there on the wing and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The ground crews swarmed the bombers, assessing damage, calling out to each other in the shorthand of mechanics who'd seen this too many times. Port elevators toast, needs full replacement. Fuel cell punctured. Leaking 80 weight into the bay. Hydraulic line split, she's dry. Foster moved through the chaos with a clipboard, marking down damage reports, his breath misting in the freezing air. The smell was overwhelming. Aviation fuel, burning oil, cordite, blood, and something else. Something metallic and cold that he'd come to recognize as the smell of men who'd just looked death in the face and survived by inches. He stopped beneath Sweet Phyllis and looked up at the ball turret. The gunner, Morrison, 19 years old, from Michigan, was still slumped inside. The medics were already there, working the hatch. Foster turned away before they got it open. This was the reality they didn't show in the recruitment posters. The B-17 Flying Fortress, the mighty bomber that could take punishment and bring boys home. Except when it couldn't. Except when the punishment was too much, or the parts ran out, or the bureaucracy moved slower than the Luftwaffe. Foster had watched this happen for 11 months. Watched the myth of invincibility bleed out onto frozen English mud, one shredded bomber at a time. And every morning, he sent them back up. Hangar 3 smelled like failure and aviation fuel. 14 B-17s sat grounded in various states of disrepair. Their noses pointed toward doors that wouldn't open for them, their wings casting long shadows under the work lights that burned through the night. Foster walked the line at 0200 hours, when the hangar was quietest, when the only sounds were the tick of cooling metal and the occasional curse from a mechanic still working a problem that had no solution. Lucky Strike sat third from the left. Bullet holes peppered her port wing. 37 separate punctures, ranging from 7.92mm rifle rounds to 20mm cannon shells. The structural frame was intact, but the skin was shredded. She needed panels, 12 square feet of replacement aluminum, properly riveted and sealed. Status: grounded. Parts requisition submitted. January 14th. Expected delivery: February 28th. 6 weeks. Memphis Queen was next. Her hydraulic system had taken a direct hit over Wilhelmshaven. Lines split, reservoir punctured, fluid sprayed throughout the bomb bay. She needed certified replacement hydraulics, lines, seals, valves, and reservoirs. Status: grounded. Parts requisition submitted. January 20th. Expected delivery: March 8th. 7 weeks. Rebel Yell. Copper Queen. Dakota Dream. Each one fixable. Each one grounded. Each one waiting for parts that were somewhere in a supply depot in New Jersey, or a warehouse in Liverpool, or on a ship that might arrive next month if the U-boats didn't sink it first. Foster stopped at Thunderbolt, ran his hand along a seam where the fuselage skin had split from stress fractures. The crack was 8 inches long. Not structural. The internal frame was solid, but it would tear wider under flight stress. And at 25,000 feet, that tear would let in air cold enough to freeze a man's lungs. The approved fix required depot-level welding equipment and certified repair procedures. Field mechanics weren't authorized. Status: grounded. Sergeant Mike Ostrowski appeared beside him, holding a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. An engineering officer came through at midnight, he said. Look at the status board. Said we need to be patient. Said the supply chain is doing everything possible. Patient, Foster repeated. His word. Foster looked down the line of grounded bombers. 14 aircraft, 140 crew positions. Pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, navigators, engineers, radio operators, gunners. Men who should be flying. Redistributed to other crews as replacements, filling dead men's seats, or sitting idle while their friends flew undermanned missions. The math was brutal. Every grounded bomber meant 10 fewer machine guns in the air, meant tighter formations with gaps the Luftwaffe could exploit, meant the bombers that did fly faced longer odds. The 303rd lost 2 birds yesterday over Emden, Ostrowski said quietly. Both shot down after flak damaged their formation. They were flying 9 instead of 12 because 3 of their fortresses are grounded waiting for parts. Foster said nothing. "We've got the parts," Ostrowski continued. "Just not the approved parts. We've got aluminum stock. We've got sealant. We've got hydraulic line that'll fit if we adapt the couplings. We could fix half these birds in 48 hours with what we've got in supply. And violate every regulation in the manual." "Yeah." They stood in silence, looking at the ghosts. Aircraft with nothing wrong that couldn't be fixed, grounded by a system that valued regulation over survival. Foster thought about Morrison, the ball turret gunner from Sweet Phyllis. 19 years old, dead before they got him out. He thought about the empty seat that would need filling tomorrow. Some other 19-year-old climbing into a dead kid's position because his own bomber was parked in this hangar, waiting for proper parts. "There has to be another way," Foster said. At 02:47 hours, Foster found himself in Supply Tent 7, surrounded by wooden crates stacked to the canvas ceiling, their stenciled labels barely visible in the light from his handheld torch. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was looking for anything, some material, some tool, some piece of equipment that could bridge the gap between regulation and reality. The tent was organized by supply category, though organized was generous. Months of requisitions, emergency orders, and misdirected shipments had turned the interior into a maze of equipment that might or might not be useful. He moved past crates of ammunition belts, boxes of radio vacuum tubes, drums of lubricating oil. His torch beam swept across labels: wire, electrical, insulated; compound, anti-seize; fabric, canvas, OD; then tape, adhesive, pressure-sensitive; OD, Army Duct. Foster stopped, pulled the torch back, read it again. He'd seen the label before. Supply had received 12 crates 2 months ago. Some Ordnance Department shipment meant for the Pacific Theater that got rerouted to England by mistake. Nobody had requisitioned it, so it sat. He pried the crate open with a screwdriver. Inside, packed in neat rows, were rolls of 2-inch wide tape. He pulled one out, turned it over in his hands. Cloth-backed, coated with something that felt waxy and slightly tacky. He stretched a length between his hands. Strong, flexible. The adhesive stuck to his skin, his sleeve, the wooden crate. The label on the roll read, "For sealing ammunition cases in high-humidity environments. Waterproof. Temperature range, 60 degrees Celsius to plus 200 degrees Celsius." Foster's mind started working through possibilities. Waterproof meant it could handle fuel exposure. Temperature range meant it wouldn't fail at altitude. Cloth backing meant it had tensile strength. Could it seal a bullet hole? "Chief, what the hell are you doing?" Foster turned. Sergeant Ostrowski stood in the tent entrance, flanked by 2 mechanics, Davis and Kowalski, both looking exhausted and curious. Foster held up the roll of tape. "What do you know about this?" Ostrowski squinted at it. "Duct tape. It's for ammo cans. Keeps moisture out in the jungle. Why?" "Adhesive strength. Sticks to damn near anything. We used it to patch a fuel drum last month. Seal held for 3 weeks. Foster pulled off a 6-inch strip, walked over to a metal shelf bracket, pressed the tape firmly against the steel surface. He burnished it down with his thumb, eliminating air pockets, then tugged at the edge. The tape held firm. "What are you thinking?" Davis asked. Foster looked at the roll in his hand, then at the 3 men watching him. "I'm thinking we've got 14 bombers grounded because we can't patch holes and seal leaks with approved materials we don't have. And this tape is designed to seal metal surfaces in extreme conditions." Ostrowski's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to alarm. "Chief, you're not seriously suggesting—" "Why not?" "Because it's not aircraft certified. Because it's not in any repair manual. Because using unauthorized materials on flight surfaces would get you court-martialed. Only if someone reports it." The three mechanics looked at each other. Kowalski broke the silence. "You want to tape a warplane together?" Foster met his eyes. "I want to keep crews alive until the proper parts arrive. This tape can do that. Or it fails at altitude and tears half the wing off." "It won't. You don't know that. I know watching good men die because we followed regulations is worse." The tent went quiet. Outside, the wind hammered against the canvas. Mary Lou sat at the far end of Hangar 3, her aluminum skin reflecting work lights in scattered, broken patterns. She'd taken a beating over keel, 20mm cannon fire through the port wing, shrapnel damage along the fuselage, a fuel line punctured in the starboard nacelle. Status: grounded. Parts requisition submitted. Expected delivery: 4 weeks. Foster stood beneath her wing at 4:30 hours with 3 rolls of duct tape, a bucket of solvent, clean rags, and a decision that could end his career. Ostrowski, Davis, and Kowalski stood with him. No one had ordered them to be there. They'd simply shown up when Foster started pulling tools. "We do this quiet," Foster said. "No paperwork, no reports. We patch her, test her, and if it works, we expand. If it fails, it's on you," Ostrowski finished. "It's on me." Foster climbed onto the wing, solvent and rags in hand. The first hole was 3 inches in diameter, punched clean through the upper skin just aft of the fuel tank. Edges were rough, peeled back slightly from the impact. He cleaned around the wound with solvent, wiping away oil, hydraulic fluid, and grime until bare aluminum showed. Then he tore off a 6-inch strip of tape. The adhesive contacted metal with a soft tack sound. Foster pressed it down, working from the center outward, eliminating bubbles, ensuring complete contact. The tape conformed to the slight curve of the wing surface. He added a second strip, overlapping the first by 1/2 inch, then a third. When he was done, the hole was sealed beneath 3 layers of gray tape, burnished smooth. He moved to the next hole, and the next. Davis worked the fuselage damage, sealing punctures along the waist gun positions. Kowalski tackled the fuel line, wrapping split sections with careful precision, testing the seal with his fingers before adding reinforcing layers. By 06:30, they'd patched 27 separate damage points. Mary Lou looked like she'd been bandaged by a field medic. Gray strips crisscrossing her skin, covering wounds that should have kept her grounded for weeks. Foster stepped back, examining their work. "Now we find out if I'm a genius or an idiot." The problem was official clearance. Flight authorization required an engineering officer's signature confirming airworthiness. No engineering officer would sign off on duct tape repairs. Foster found Mary Lou's pilot, Captain Vincent Caruso, in the officer's mess, drinking coffee that looked like it had been brewed from motor oil. "Captain, I need a favor." Caruso looked up. "What kind of favor gets you in my face before 0700? "The kind that gets Mary Lou back in the air today." That got Caruso's attention. "She's grounded for a month." She was. Not anymore. Foster explained the repairs, the tape, the unauthorized modification. Caruso listened without interrupting, his expression moving through skepticism, disbelief, and finally something that might have been hope. "You patched my bird with tape." "Yes. And you want me to fly her." "Just a test run. 20 minutes. Local airspace. No combat load. If the patches hold, you've got your bomber back. If they fail, we abort, and I take the court-martial." Caruso was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My crew's been sitting idle for 2 weeks. Good men, watching other crews fly their missions. You're telling me we can fly today? If you're willing to risk it." Caruso stood, grabbed his jacket. "Get her pre-flight ready. We take off at 0800. Dawn broke cold and gray over RAF Ridgewell. Foster stood at the edge of the hard stand, watching Caruso's crew run through pre-flight checks on Mary Lou. The ground crew had been briefed, quietly, carefully, about what they were looking for. Not whether the repairs met regulations, but whether they'd hold. Staff Sergeant Eddie Chen, the crew chief, circled the aircraft, examining each taped section. He pressed his palm against a patch on the port wing, testing adhesion. He ran his fingers along the edges, checking for lift. He crouched beneath the starboard nacelle, inspecting the fuel line repairs. Finally, he turned to Foster and gave a single nod. Caruso's crew climbed aboard. 10 men who didn't know if they were about to make history or become a cautionary tale. Through the cockpit window, Foster could see Caruso running through his instrument check, his co-pilot, Lieutenant James Holder, beside him calling out readings. The number 1 engine coughed, caught, roared to life. Then 2, 3, 4. The sound was beautiful, that deep, synchronized thunder of 4 Wright Cyclone engines at full power. Mary Lou began to taxi. Foster's heart hammered against his ribs. Ostrowski stood beside him, silent, arms crossed. Davis and Kowalski were positioned at different vantage points along the runway, binoculars ready, watching for any sign of failure, tape peeling away, patches tearing loose, fuel streaming from the nacelle. Mary Lou turned onto the runway, brakes locked, engines building power. Even from 200 yards away, Foster could feel the vibration, the raw force of 4,800 horsepower straining against metal. The brakes released. She accelerated down the runway, tail coming up, speed building, 60 miles per hour, 80, 100. The nose lifted. The main gear left the ground. She was airborne. Foster exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ostrowski raised binoculars, tracking the bomber as she climbed into the gray morning sky. Patches are holding. No visible separation. No fuel trail. Mary Lou banked left, coming around in a wide circle over the field. The tape strips were visible even from the ground, gray scars across silver skin. 15 minutes passed like hours. Foster watched the bomber climb to 8,000 feet, level off, execute standard maneuvers, banks, shallow dives, throttle changes that would stress every repair they'd made. The patches held. At 0823, Mary Lou entered the landing pattern. Caruso brought her in smooth and steady, touching down with barely a bounce, engines throttling back as she rolled out and taxied toward the hard stand. When the engines finally cut, the sudden silence felt surreal. Caruso emerged from the crew hatch, jumped down to the tarmac, and walked straight to Foster. His face was unreadable. Then he broke into a grin. "Chief, I don't know whether to kiss you or have you committed. The repairs held? Every single one. No leaks, no separation, no problems. We took her to 10,000 feet. She flew like nothing was ever wrong." The crew was climbing out now, gathering around Mary Lou, staring at the tape patches that had just brought them home. Chen was already up on the wing, inspecting the seals, running his hands over surfaces that had survived 20 minutes of flight stress. "They held," Chen called down. "Adhesions still perfect. No edge lift, no tears." Foster felt something break loose in his chest. Tension he'd been carrying since 0430, since he'd first pressed tape to metal and gambled everything on a crazy idea. Ostrowski clapped him on the shoulder. "You magnificent bastard! You actually did it." Word traveled fast. By 1400 hours, mechanics from 3 other squadrons had found reasons to walk past Hangar 3, slowing down as they passed Mary Lou, staring at the gray tape patches that shouldn't have worked, but did. By 1800 hours, Foster had given 5 separate demonstrations, showing the cleaning process, the application technique, the burnishing method that eliminated air pockets and ensured proper adhesion. By the next morning, Supply Tent 7 was missing 8 rolls of duct tape. Foster didn't ask where they went. He knew. At the 303rd Bombardment Group, 15 miles north, a crew chief named Patterson used tape to seal bullet holes in a B-17 called Pistol Packin' Mama. The bomber flew a mission to Ham and returned intact. At the 91st, a mechanic named Rodriguez patched fuel line damage on Outhouse Mouse. She flew to Osnabrück and back without losing a drop of fuel. At the 384th, at the 351st, at bases across East Anglia, mechanics who'd watched too many bombers sit grounded started pulling out rolls of gray tape and making repairs the manual said were impossible. It became a quiet revolution. No orders, no official approval, just mechanics sharing knowledge the way they always had, over cigarettes behind hangars, in whispered conversations in mess tents, through demonstrations given in the dark hours before dawn when officers weren't watching. The tape wasn't perfect. It couldn't fix everything. Structural damage still required depot-level repairs. Engine problems still needed certified parts. But for the dozens of smaller wounds, the bullet holes, the split seams, the minor fuel leaks, the tape bought time. Days, sometimes weeks, until proper parts arrived. And in a war measured in missions and survival rates, time was everything. Foster started seeing it everywhere. Gray strips on wings, tails, fuselages. Some patches were small, a few inches covering a single puncture. Others were extensive, entire sections wrapped and sealed, holding together damage that should have grounded the aircraft for months. The pilots noticed. They started requesting tape be added to emergency supply kits, right alongside fire extinguishers and first aid equipment. Some crews took to carrying rolls in the cockpit, applying patches themselves mid-flight when they took damage. On February 14th, a B-17 from the 379th took a 40mm flak over Hanover that tore a hole in her bomb bay. The bombardier, a lieutenant named Walsh, grabbed a roll of duct tape from the emergency kit and sealed the wound himself at 22,000 feet, bare hands going numb in the -40 cold. The patch held for 3 hours and 200 miles. The bomber made it home. That story spread faster than the repair technique itself. By March 1943, duct tape had become as essential to bomber operations as fuel and ammunition. Supply sergeants, who'd initially dismissed it as mechanic nonsense, started requisitioning it by the case. Some bases began marking it as critical supply, right alongside hydraulic fluid and machine gun belts. The gray strips became a badge of honor, visible proof that a bomber had been wounded, repaired, and sent back into the fight. Foster watched it happen with quiet satisfaction. His crazy idea, born from desperation in a frozen hangar at 0200, had become standard practice across the 8th Air Force. But revolutions, even quiet ones, don't stay quiet forever. The official inquiry began on March 17, 1943, when a Boeing engineering liaison named Robert Mackenzie visited RAF Ridgewell to inspect maintenance practices and noticed something that didn't belong in any manual he'd ever read. Gray tape, covering bullet holes on a B-17 preparing for a mission to Bremen. Mackenzie stopped mid-stride on the hard stand, stared at the patched bomber, and asked the nearest mechanic a question that would bring Foster's world crashing down. "What the hell is that?" By 1600 hours, Foster was standing in Group Commander Colonel Warren's office, watching Mackenzie point at photographs of taped bombers, like a prosecutor presenting evidence of murder. "This is a clear violation of Army Air Force Regulation 6544, Mackenzie said, his voice tight with professional outrage. "Unauthorized modification of aircraft structures using non-certified materials. Chief Engineer Foster has systematically compromised the airworthiness of United States military aircraft, placed crews at risk, and violated protocols designed to ensure safety." Colonel Warren, a pilot with 27 missions, and the exhausted eyes of a man who'd sent too many crews to die, listened without expression. "How many aircraft have been modified this way?" Warren asked. "At this base alone? 19, Mackenzie said. "Across the 8th Air Force? Based on supply requisitions, potentially hundreds." Warren turned to Foster. "Chief, explain." Foster kept his voice level. "We were losing more bombers to parts shortages than to enemy action. Aircraft sitting grounded for weeks waiting for materials that weren't arriving. I found a solution using available supplies. The repairs are holding. The bombers are flying. Crews are coming home." "Using non-certified adhesive tape," Mackenzie cut in. "Material that has never been tested for flight applications, never approved by Boeing Engineering, never validated for structural integrity under combat conditions." "It's been tested," Foster said. "Every mission is a test. Every bomber that comes home is validated. That's not how engineering works. That's exactly how engineering works in a war." Warren held up a hand. "Gentlemen," he looked at Mackenzie, "what are you recommending?" "Immediate cessation of unauthorized repairs. All aircraft modified with non-approved materials to be grounded pending proper inspection. And Chief Engineer Foster should face court-martial for willful violation of military regulations." The word hung in the air like cordite smoke. Court-martial. Warren was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Finally, "Mr. Mackenzie, how long would it take to properly repair the 19 bombers currently flying with tape patches? Using approved procedures and certified materials? 6 to 8 weeks per aircraft. So we'd be grounding 19 bombers for 2 months. To ensure safety, we'd be grounding 19 bombers," Warren repeated, "reducing our operational capacity by 30% in the middle of a strategic bombing campaign because the repairs don't match the manual." Mackenzie's jaw tightened. "Regulations exist for reasons, Colonel. So do wars." Warren stood, walked to the window overlooking the flight line. 2 B-17s were taxiing in from a mission, both wearing visible tape patches. "Chief Foster, you're officially reprimanded for unauthorized modifications. Consider this documentation for your record." "Sir," Mackenzie started. "However," Warren continued, "given that survival rates have measurably improved since these repairs began, and given that we are in active combat operations with limited resources, I'm authorizing continued use of field expedient repairs pending formal evaluation by Army Air Force Engineering Command." Mackenzie looked like he'd been struck. "You can't authorize what violates—" "I just did. You're dismissed, Mr. Mackenzie." The engineer left stiff-backed and furious. Foster remained standing. Warren turned to him. "This evaluation will come, Chief. And when it does, your career might not survive it. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Was it worth it?" Foster thought about 19 bombers flying instead of grounded, about crews alive instead of reassigned to replacement lists. "Yes, sir," Warren nodded. "Dismissed." The formal evaluation arrived 6 weeks later, not with fanfare, but with a quiet bureaucratic inevitability that felt worse than any court-martial. A 3-officer review board, a colonel from 8th Air Force Engineering, a major from Material Command, and a captain from Boeing's Military Liaison Office. They spent 4 days at RAF Ridgewell, inspecting every taped repair, interviewing mechanics, reviewing maintenance logs, and compiling data. Foster wasn't allowed to attend the sessions. He worked his shifts, supervised repairs, and waited. On the 5th day, he was called to Colonel Warren's office. The review board sat on one side of the desk. Warren sat behind it. Foster stood. The engineering colonel, a man named Brennan, with gray temples and a Purple Heart ribbon, opened a folder. "Chief Engineer Foster, we've completed our assessment of field expedient repairs using pressure-sensitive adhesive tape on B-17 aircraft." "Here it comes," Foster thought. "Our findings are as follows. The repairs, while unauthorized, have demonstrated adequate performance under combat conditions. Tape adhesion remains effective across temperature ranges from ground level to 25,000 feet. Seal integrity holds under normal flight stress. No catastrophic failures attributable to tape repairs have been documented." Foster felt something cautiously lift in his chest. However, Brennan continued, the repairs do not meet engineering standards for permanent airframe modification. They are, at best, temporary field solutions. Which is all they were ever meant to be, Foster said quietly. Brennan's eyes flicked up. Indeed. He turned a page. We also reviewed operational data. In the 8 weeks since tape repairs became widespread practice, the 301st Bombardment Group's operational readiness increased from 62% to 84%. Mission-capable aircraft numbers rose by 31%. Time to repair for minor combat damage decreased from an average of 19 days to 3 days. The Material Command Major spoke next. Survival rates also showed statistically significant improvement. Bombers returning from missions with minor damage that would have previously resulted in extended grounding are now returning to operations within 48 hours. This keeps experienced crews flying and reduces the need for replacement personnel. A long silence filled the office. Brennan closed the folder. Chief Engineer Foster, your actions violated protocols designed to ensure aircraft safety. However, those same actions demonstrably improved combat effectiveness and likely saved lives. This puts us in an unusual position. Warren leaned forward. What's your recommendation, Colonel? That field expedient repairs using pressure-sensitive adhesive tape be officially recognized as acceptable temporary measures for non-structural combat damage, pending availability of certified repair materials. That technical guidelines be issued to standardize application procedures, and that Chief Engineer Foster be formally reprimanded for unauthorized modifications. Foster's stomach dropped, and simultaneously commended for innovative problem-solving under combat conditions. Foster blinked. Sir? You broke the rules, Chief, but you were right to break them. That's worth acknowledging, even if we can't officially encourage it. The Boeing captain, who'd been silent until now, added, the company is reviewing the adhesive tape specifications. If it meets our standards, we may incorporate it into emergency repair protocols for all heavy bomber operations. Brennan stood, extended his hand. Foster shook it, still processing. Your formal reprimand will be placed in your record, Brennan said. So will a commendation for exceptional initiative. They'll sit right next to each other. Future promotion boards can decide which matters more. After they left, Warren pulled out a bottle of whiskey he wasn't supposed to have and poured 2 glasses. To breaking rules that deserve breaking, Warren said. They drank in silence. No medals, no ceremony. Just a reprimand and a commendation. Filed together in a personnel folder that would follow Foster for the rest of his military career. A permanent record of the time he was punished and praised for the same act. It was the most honest reckoning he could have hoped for. Salinas, California. June 1952. The garage smelled like motor oil, welding flux, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Harold Foster, 58 years old now, gray at the temples and carrying 15 pounds he didn't have during the war, bent over the engine compartment of a 1947 Chevrolet pickup, examining a cracked radiator hose. He reached for his toolbox, pulled out a roll of duct tape, gray, cloth-backed, the same design he'd first found in a supply tent 9 years and a lifetime ago, and tore off an 8-inch strip. That'll hold you until the replacement part comes in, he told the truck's owner, a farmer named Martinez, who looked skeptical. You're gonna fix my radiator with tape? Foster wrapped the split section carefully, burnishing the edges. Temporarily. It'll hold pressure for a week, maybe 2. Long enough for me to order the proper hose. Martinez watched him work. You sound pretty confident. I've used this stuff to fix worse problems than leaky hoses. The repair took 4 minutes. Foster test-filled the radiator, checked for leaks, found none. Martinez paid, shook his head in bemused disbelief, and drove off. Foster washed his hands, poured fresh coffee, and walked to the small office at the back of the garage. The radio was on, some news program talking about Korea, about jets now instead of propeller bombers, about a different war in a different time. He sat at the desk, sipped coffee, and looked at the photograph on the wall. RAF Ridgewell, winter 1943, Hangar 3. A B-17 called Mary Lou surrounded by ground crew, her skin covered in gray tape patches, her crew standing proud beside her. They'd called it crazy. Command had called it reckless. The engineering board had called it unauthorized field expedient modification. The crews had called it survival. Foster never made headlines, never got a medal he could frame. The official records listed him as a chief engineer with a reprimand for protocol violations and a commendation for initiative. Contradictory paperwork that confused every promotion board he ever faced. But he'd kept flying machines in the air when the system said they should be grounded. He'd kept crews alive when bureaucracy said they should wait. And in doing that, he'd helped turn a piece of Army surplus tape into something that outlasted the war itself. Duct tape was everywhere now, in garages, workshops, homes across America. People used it to fix cars, patch windows, seal boxes, and repair furniture. Most of them had no idea it had been born in war, tested in combat, proven in the freezing skies over Germany by mechanics who refused to accept that unfixable meant dead. The radio played on. Korea, jets, a new generation facing new problems. Foster finished his coffee, stood, grabbed another roll of tape from the supply shelf. He had a '39 Ford coming in at 2 o'clock with a torn door seal. Easy fix. Outside, the California sun was warm and bright. No flak, no fighters, no wounded bombers limping home. Just a small garage, a roll of gray tape, and a man who'd learned that sometimes the craziest solutions are the ones that keep everything from falling apart. He walked back into the shop, past the photograph of Mary Lou, past ghosts only he could see, mechanics working through frozen nights, bombers held together by impossible repairs, crews who came home because someone refused to follow regulations that would have killed them. They called it crazy, Foster said quietly to the empty garage, but crazy kept them alive. And maybe, in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.